Hi, everybody. Good evening or good night from Tel Aviv. I'm Yael Patir, J Street's Israel Director. Thank you for joining us. I hope that wherever you are safe and healthy and taking care of yourselves. We all live under a surreal reality, and connectivity and interdependency seems more present than ever. Thank you for joining this call. Thank you for caring about what is happening in Israel, which is always something that we appreciate. I'm not sure the content of our call today, Barak, will be uplifting or will necessarily make people feel better. But I do hope that we manage to provide accurate information and relevant analysis of the current state of affairs in Israel. I want to really thank Barak Ravid for joining us and taking the time to speak with us and do this call. It's not taken for granted. As a father of young kids and the senior correspondent for Israel's Channel 13 News, as a regular contributor for Axios on Israeli political affairs, as a big figure on Twitter. You have your hands more than full, and really, and I don't say it lightly, juggling between safeguarding Israeli democracy and your family. So I hope that this call for you, falls under the description of your work and goals.
Yeah, hi, El. Thank you, and thanks everybody, and thanks for inviting me on this call. It's one of the things I really like to do, and actually, I have to thank the coronavirus for introducing me with Zoom, because actually today it's the third time already that I'm using this app. So you see, there's some things, something good is coming out of this crisis.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
but so
let me give a short introductory, and then we'll
okay.
dive in. So it's been a very, very tense day today. And it just closed. I think we can say it's 10 p.m. in Israel. It's just closed with new corona regulations delivered to us by the Prime Minister. We woke up, we started this day with the Shin Bet messages of eavesdropping to our phones. And the Knesset was dispersed. There were hundreds of cars in demonstrations against this act that were stopped by the police for no or with no real order. Soon, Barak, you'll start giving us sort of the list of actions and reality in Israel. We will start by talking about the coronavirus and all the actions that the government has taken, and then we'll move to talk more about the negotiations or the formation of the government. And I just want to say for all of us, for all of those listening to us, that you can send your questions in chat, and I will channel them for you. And my short opening sentence is to say that the corona is a real and global threat, and we are all experiencing it, of course. The Netanyahu government is pushing its limits. It is possible to look at each one of the actions that Barak will just go through and understand them and justify them, and given the time and the circumstances. But I think that when all is put together, and today was really a shift, I think, in a sense, in the mindset, the picture that you see of actions that are taken by a government that is not an elected government, but an interim government, are quite frightening. And I know that all of you probably who came to listen to us today are want to understand what is really happening and how you should internalize and understand it. So, Barak, can you walk us through really, what are all these pieces that are coming together in this political hour and given the coronavirus crisis that we are in? Thank you.
Yes. Let's first look at what is actually going on in Israel, not in the last few days, but let's say in the last year. We had 3 election campaigns in less than 1 year. The government that is in power right now, it's an interim government of an interim government of an interim government. Okay, it has no legitimacy and no mandate whatsoever. It was not elected for 3 elections in 1 year. Actually, in the last elections and in the elections before, the current government, the current coalition, does not have a majority in the Knesset. Okay, it is governing as an interim government without a majority in the Knesset. And when this is the political situation and the political stalemate, we enter the corona crisis, which started before the elections, but before the elections, there were real efforts by the government to somehow contain it, and contain it not only on the ground, but also publicly, so that it will not influence the elections in any way, both for practical reasons, because they wanted the elections to take place, but second, in order not to make the corona crisis an issue in the election campaign, because then I think that Netanyahu and his right-wing bloc thought that it would harm them politically, especially because in the last 10 years they were in power and they controlled the Ministry of Health, and a lot of the deficiencies that we see today come from there. So the elections ended, and the results, as you know it, Netanyahu had a personal success, personal gain. His party got a bit bigger, but at the end of the day, his bloc does not have the majority in the Knesset, and Benny Gantz's center-left bloc has the majority of at least 61 seats over Netanyahu's bloc with 58, and Orly Levy, who was part of the ran together with the Labour Party, but at a certain point a few days ago decided that she wants to freelance, and she moved to be on defense, not in any of the blocks. And in the current political situation, when this is the situation, the government took several steps that were pretty draconian. One of the main steps that happened, it happened in the middle of the night, around a week, something like a week ago. The Minister of Justice, Amir Ohana, the interim Minister of Justice, decided to announce emergency regulations on the judicial system. The result was most of the courts were shut down. This might sound to you pretty normal because there is an emergency, there is the corona crisis, but he did it 2 days before Prime Minister Netanyahu's trial was supposed to begin at the Jerusalem District Court. Due to Minister Ohana's decision, the judges decided to postpone Netanyahu's trial in more than 2 months to the end of May. This is obviously, as you can imagine, highly politically charged, and was also very important politically for Netanyahu, because these days it was before President Rivlin even gave the mandate to Benny Gantz to start forming a coalition. It was a very politically sensitive moment, and if Netanyahu wanted to prevent in any way this picture of him sitting in court and listening to the reading of his indictment. Of course, that Minister Ohana denies that he had anything to do with Netanyahu's trial, and it wasn't connected to politics whatsoever. I'll say it in a, let's say, I'll use an understatement. I don't believe any word that he says. After this move, there were several other moves. First, more and more regulations that prevented people from leaving their homes. He tonight, those regulations go almost as far as they can. And another step was, I guess you all heard it, using the Shin Bet security service methods and tactics in order to spy on Israelis that are suspected of being infected with the coronavirus. How does this work? The Shin Bet uses checks the location of people that are known as being hosts of the coronavirus, they're known to the Ministry of Health. They're checking their locations in the last 14 days. And then they try to find all the people who were standing next to them in a radius of 2 meters, and then they send them text messages telling them to go into self-quarantine. This might sound like a great idea and very practical idea that is also a good idea to counter the coronavirus with, but as you can imagine, this is highly controversial when it comes to privacy, civil liberties, and it was really unprecedented in the history of Israel, such spying against huge amounts of people. We're talking about tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Israelis that were exposed to this spying. And the reason it was so controversial was that it was done through emergency decrees without any oversight of the Knesset, of the parliament. The reason there was no oversight of the parliament was because the speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, and the Likud are doing everything they can to stop the work of the Knesset. Why are they doing this? Because they don't have the majority. But they are still holding the post of Speaker of the Knesset because it's an interim government and an interim Knesset. So basically what they did in the last week was to basically shut down the Knesset, practically shutting it down. It wasn't, the doors were open, but there was no real work done. They prevented Gantz's center-left bloc from forming the Knesset committee, which is the most important committee because it runs, it forms all the other committees. It runs the parliament. It's in charge of all the regulations inside the Knesset. He also prevented the formation of the coronavirus committee, a special committee for oversight on the government's operations against the coronavirus. And he also prevented forming the Foreign Relations and Security Committee that in every parliament, it's a very important committee. In Israel, it's even more important because it supervises all the government bodies that deal, the IDF, the Mossad, the Shin Bet, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the National Security Council, and this committee right now does not work. Okay.
How does he explain that, Barak?
Okay, but before, how does he explain that? Another thing that he did, because he did all that, he also prevented a vote on choosing a new Speaker of Knesset. Okay, how convenient. So Yuli Edelstein stays the Speaker of the Knesset, prevents a vote for choosing a new Speaker of Knesset, and the result is that people stay at home. Okay, the judicial system. Okay, this branch of government is shut down. The legislative branch is also shut down. The only branch of government that is working is the executive branch. And in a country that wants to be the only democracy in the Middle East, this doesn't look very democratic to me and to other people. You have to add to that another thing that happened today, and it was the police that prevented demonstrations against the Speaker of the Knesset and against Netanyahu and against everything we see here for the last 2 weeks. The police just said that he did it because of he wanted to keep the public safe because of the coronavirus, but it's pretty obvious that it was done with orders from the highest echelons of the government. So this is the situation.
And I will just interrupt to say about the police that there's, for more than a year, I believe, there's no head of police.
There is no chief of police. There's an interim chief of police that wants to be not only the acting chief. He wants to be the real chief of police. So I guess that it's part of his calculations when he gives orders and takes decisions. So on top of all of that, on all of this really completely chaotic and crazy situation, Israel tries to form a new government. Benny Gantz got the mandate to form a government. He has another, I think, 24 days, if I'm not mistaken, to form a government. And right now, Benny Gantz, who actually, in the way for getting the mandate, gave several very important statements, basically saying that he asked for the support of the Arab Joint List, and he received its support, all of its 15 members. It's something which was historic in the way that the Arab minority in Israel was involved in decision-making in the country in the highest levels. But what Gantz is doing in the last few days is, instead of trying to form a government of 61 members with the outside support of the 15 members of the Arab Joint List, instead of doing that, he started negotiating a unity government with Netanyahu. And all along the election campaign, Gantz promised again and again and again and again that he will not be part of any government led by Netanyahu. This commitment was thrown to the trash, and now Gantz is negotiating with Netanyahu some sort of unity government, which the reason for it is obviously the coronavirus crisis, but such a move can have huge political ramifications, first and foremost inside of Benny Gantz's party. That I don't know if all of you are aware, Benny Gantz's party is not it's not one party, it's a unifications of three factions, which even inside those three factions, there are different factions. Okay, it's not like in the US, Democratic Party, the Republican Party. It's Benny Gantz's party, it's Yair Lapid's party, it's Moshe Ya'alon's party, it's Gabi Ashkenazi, who doesn't have a party, he's just one guy, but he's a faction of his own, and another faction within Moshe Ya'alon's faction of two members of Knesset, Tzvi Hauser and Yoaz Hendel, which are sort of a right-wing, they're sort of like, let's say, if I compare it to America, think about two never-Trumpers from the Republican Party that decided to run with the Democratic Party just to kick out Trump. Okay, this is the analogy. But when they finally have a majority, they say, okay, but we don't want to kick out Trump with the support of the Hispanic vote. Okay, so this is what's going on right now. That those two guys are saying, okay, we want to kick out Bibi, but we don't want to do it with the support of the Arab vote. And when this is the reality, it means that Gantz doesn't really have a 61-member government, center-left government. And so right now yeah.
No, finish your sentence and then I want to.
So right now, as I said, Gantz is holding negotiations. His people are negotiating with Netanyahu's people on some sort of a unity government. And the main question that they're discussing, which is pretty amazing, is for how long Netanyahu will stay as the prime minister. Netanyahu demands that he will stay, that it will be 2 years, and 2 years. Gantz, who until 2 weeks ago said that he's not willing to sit one day with Netanyahu, is now trying to get Netanyahu to agree to the minimum number of, a minimum amount of time as prime minister. And Netanyahu, at least in my assessment, has no interest to to agree to Gantz's request. My personal view is that Netanyahu's, because of his legal situation, Netanyahu's interest is to maintain the status quo, this chaotic status quo, and stay as a prime minister of an interim government and go for fourth elections that, because of the corona crisis, will happen who knows when, sometime at the end of the year. This is the earliest. So for Netanyahu, the interest is to maintain things as they are. It's not clear if he will be able to do so considering public opinion.
Great. So this is exactly what I wanted to ask you about. And I want to go back and dig in a bit more about the negotiations and the options that Gantz has or doesn't have. But let me walk back, because I have a couple of questions that are basically asking, how are Israelis reacting? How are Israelis reacting to their phones being, tapped into, tracked, monitored? How are people reacting to the Knesset being shut down? We mentioned that there was a demonstration that was organized today with a convoy of cars, because we should probably just say that as of this moment, Israelis are all instructed to stay at home and not leave their house for anything that is not essential, basically. So today there was a demonstration organized, and you can also not be more than one person in a car, or two people. So there was a demonstration of cars with individuals in cars driving with black flags from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in protest of what is happening, and that demonstration was stopped by the police. We mentioned it, but beyond that, that was an action by activists and people that are connected. What is your sense of the general reaction of the public?
First, just before I answer that, just an update about the whole issue of the Shin Bet tracking, monitoring people's phones. The Supreme Court took a decision a few minutes ago that basically said that if until Monday, if on Monday there's no decision in the Knesset to form the Security and Foreign Relations Committee to so that there will be oversight over this process of the Shin Bet tracking phones, it will order the Shin Bet to stop it. So I think that the Supreme Court took a very interesting decision, because it basically put an ultimatum to the Speaker of Knesset to stop freezing all the processes inside the Parliament. About the public, look, there were several public opinion polls in the last few days. They all showed that the public, and I guess you don't have to be a genius to think about it. The public is scared. The public supports most of the draconian steps the government took. It has the support of the public. I think the reason is that the situation is real. I mean, nobody invented the coronavirus. It's a real situation, and it's overwhelming because Israelis are used to emergency situations of a certain kind. They're used to rockets being fired from Gaza. They're used to suicide bombers. They're used to tensions in the northern border. But they're not used to this sort of pandemic with an enemy that they don't see, and they don't really know how to fight it, and that it doesn't, and that there's almost nothing to do to prevent them from getting infected because there's no vaccine. So I think people are overwhelmed with the situation, and this is why the situation is so dangerous. Because if you look during history, those kind of crises, those kind of emergency situations, they are the fertile ground for governments to crack down on democracy. This is why this is so scary, because there's a political crisis, there's a health crisis, there's an emergency situation. This is exactly the time when in many countries during history, this is how governments are taking more and more draconian steps against democratic institutions, against civil society, against their political opponents. This is why this is so scary. And I have to tell you something. I think that one of the things that we see today, one of the main problems, is that in many parts of the Israeli press, if there's one thing Netanyahu managed to do, was to take over big parts of the Israeli press. And it's either that the parts of the Israeli press that he controls directly or indirectly are just, basically it's they're just cheerleading all of his actions. And another big part of the Israeli press is scared. And there are very few media outlets and journalists in Israel that are speaking out about what is going on. It's still a strong group, but it's a group that is much smaller than it used to be before. And I think that this is one of the reasons why you see that the public basically supports what the government is doing. I'll give you another example. For the last week or so, Netanyahu almost every night gives a statement for 15 or 20 minutes on prime time. He doesn't take questions. He just goes and speaks and gives speeches that, some of what he says is true, it's factual, but the tone is very intimidating, it's very frightening. In a press conference a few days ago, he brought in the Director General of the Ministry of Health, who said in prime time on the air on camera that there could be thousands of fatalities, thousands of people dead in Israel from the coronavirus. I'm not saying that it's not a scenario, but right now, just so that you know, still we have around 700 people who were infected. Nobody, God forbid, that it won't happen, but until now, nobody died. Okay, I'm not saying that nobody will die. I'm just saying that for now, this is the situation. And when people hear those things day after day on prime time, there's from their prime minister and from their from very senior officials who stand beside him, there's no doubt in my mind that they get scared. So I'm not surprised when they say, okay, whatever the government does that can keep us safe, we are okay with it.
I'll throw in there, I think that people are scared. I think the thing that is in front of their mind right now is their income. And I've already been hearing about a lot of people around me in the private sector that have been fired. Of course, teachers and kindergarten teachers and so on. And I think also even more so, of course, in peripheral communities, this is much more of a concern. You mentioned before that emergency and moments of crisis are moments where democracies are most under threat, and the economic situation is of course a big factor in that, and can really fasten the process as well. Also, to throw in, you mentioned Netanyahu's speeches to the public in the evening. Another thing that Netanyahu launched a couple of weeks ago is a massive campaign with billboards throughout the country, which is basically calling the Joint Arab List terrorist supporters. All of them, all the 15 members of Knesset are being called terrorist supporters, and In these ads, you see Gantz next to two members of Knesset from the joint list, basically accusing him that if he will go with them, he is forming a government of terrorist supporters. And it's a clear, while it's a racist, awful, horrible, ugly racist campaign, its aim is very clear to delegitimize the political partnership and basically the only viable alternative to Netanyahu's right-wing bloc, which is a center-left plus the joint list bloc. So based on that, let me ask you a few questions about that, and I'm going to the composition of the coalition. Gantz and Blue and White are saying that they have the majority in the Knesset. However, they don't have the majority to form a minority government, as you mentioned. So how does that catch-22 work? Do you see them having the courage to go to such a move, or is it totally off the table? Question 2 from one of our viewers is, in the negotiation between Blue and White and the joint list, when they when they got them to the place to recommend Gantz and do this unprecedented move, what are they expecting in return? And what happens if there's a unity government to those promises? And how do you see all of that impacting Israeli, Jewish-Arab relationship inside Israel?
First, right now, I don't see Gantz going for. Right now, I don't see Gantz going for a 61-member government with the outside support of the Arab Joint List. I think he's trying with all of his power to go for a unity government in the best terms that he can. There are those who say that the reason he's doing it is because he knows Netanyahu at the end of the day will say no, because, for example, one of the things Gantz wants is to hold the Ministry of Justice. I don't see Netanyahu giving Gantz the Ministry of Justice, but I'm just saying that there are people saying that Netanyahu will say no, and then Gantz will be able to go to the public and to the members of his party that are against a government with the support of the Joint Arab List, and to tell them, look, we negotiated, we tried, I had good intentions, I had good faith. Netanyahu said no, so now the least you can do is just to follow me to this 61-member government. I have to tell you that I don't see this happening. I think that Gantz is, every day that passes from now on, will just push him more and more towards Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu will pay a very, very small price for having Gantz in his coalition. It's very sad to say, but Gantz and his people are very bad politicians, very bad negotiators. A lot of the things that they did throughout the last year, throughout those 3 election campaigns, were really in many points during the last year. It seemed like it was a team from the NBA against amateurs or the little leagues,
But you can give them some credit for the way they handled themselves in the last couple of weeks, no?
No.
I mean, I do. You don't.
I don't give them any credit, because at the end of the day, they'll get credit according to the results. Right now, the results are not very promising. And also, I think that the path, the route that they're taking until now is not very promising. A person who heads a party for 3 elections campaigns in 1 year and still has members inside of his party, and you have to understand that it's a party that doesn't have primaries. You don't even get elected. Benny Gantz is the one that calls the shots on who's in the list and who's not, and he still has people within the list that have the nerve to tell him that they will vote against him so that he will not be prime minister. I'm sorry, but I can't give credit for such a behavior, such a political amateur hour. I just a lot of people ask me what can Gantz do. So I tell them if it was Netanyahu, he would have sworn a government 2 seconds after he got the mandate, regardless of who's in the government, regardless of how many votes he has, regardless of anything. He would just vote. He would just swear in a government, because he understands that every day that passes doesn't make forming a government and swearing in a government any easier. It just makes it harder, and you get weaker. People can squeeze you more, and I don't see. This is why I don't see Netanyahu agreeing to any of Benny Gantz's real requests. He'll just try to squeeze Gantz more and more as much as we get closer to the end of Gantz's mandate. And you have to understand, if Benny Gantz decides to go for a unity government with Netanyahu, the result will be dismembering and disintegration of his party. Okay? Benny Gantz his party has 33 seats in the Knesset. From those 33 seats, I think that something like 15 seats are members of Yair Lapid's party. All of them will go away with Yair Lapid. Benny Gantz will stay with half of his party. Okay? And with that, he will enter the coalition. And with that, he would hope that Netanyahu makes good for their agreement on doing a rotation in the prime minister's office.
Why can't Gantz be first? Somebody's asking. Why does every unity proposal begin with Netanyahu being first?
Because Netanyahu doesn't want to be second. Because if Netanyahu is second, that's the end of his political career. You have to understand, according to the Israeli law, if you're a prime minister, you can serve with an indictment, okay? According to the current law. If you're a minister in the government, even if you're the vice prime minister, you cannot serve with an indictment. So for Netanyahu to be the second in the rotation means that until he gets to be the prime minister, he's just a regular member of Knesset. And it's not a very good position to be when you're in court. So Netanyahu would never agree to be second. This is why there is, in my opinion, there's no real way for, once you say that you're going for a unity government with Netanyahu, it means that you agreed that he will be first, and that he will be first for a pretty long time. And more than that, I cannot see any scenario whatsoever that even if Netanyahu says, okay, I'll be in the first year, in the first 18 months, I don't see a situation when there's a peaceful, organized transition after a year, after 18 months, Netanyahu will just say, okay, thank you, Benny. This is my desk. This is the prime minister's residence. We're leaving the prime minister's residence, me and Sarah and our son Yair. We're just leaving the residence. Come with your wife and your kids and live here. I do not see this scenario happening. Aliens will land in Israel before this will happen. Okay? And the thing is that
you don't see him having a plea bargain, going for a plea bargain?
Netanyahu?
Yeah.
Not at all. Netanyahu will go for trial right now. His mindset is, I'm going to trial. I will serve as prime minister during trial. For now, his trial is postponed. I guess he will try and postpone it more and more and more because of the coronavirus. In a year, who will even remember that there's still a trial? So, and people will get used to a prime minister that has indictments, has trials, and still serves,
He'll
no
also
problem.
use the trial. He's going to use it as he uses, the campaign of everybody's against him and he's the victim. Therefore, yeah.
Yeah, but you have to understand, if Gantz, the scenario that I see is that Gantz, let's say, joins the government in a unity government with, let's say, 20 members of his party come with him. What happens to him politically the day after is that he will get a lot of portfolios in the government, and he gets a promise for rotation in a year or 18 months, but he loses all of his voters. All of Gantz's voters, the reason that they voted for him is because they wanted to kick out Netanyahu, and they will not agree in any way for Gantz to join Netanyahu. And if Gantz does that, he will lose his voters.
And Gantz's voters do support a minority government supported by the joint list.
Again, not all of them, but if you look at public opinion polls, you see that were done lately, you see that 72% of the voters of the Blue and White Party support a government with the outside support of the Arab Joint List. This is, I think, 12 points higher than it was 3 months ago. So,
we have like 17 minutes left. I want to take 2 more questions that I have here about the coronavirus, and then I want us really to have time about our last 10 minutes to talk about the issues that you are reporting about and we are mostly interested about, which have to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and annexation and occupation. Just quickly, there was a question about how do you manage basically this crisis without a Knesset on the economical side, with economic situation. There's no budget that is approved. The government needs to provide aid and packages and support and so on. Wouldn't that require the Knesset? That's one question. And then the other question is, what is the impact of the crisis on the daily operation of the IDF?
So first about the budget and the economy. One of the things that Benny Gantz and his party did, which I thought was a mistake, was that they said that they will support any vote about appropriations and allocations of assistance of financial aid to businesses, to small businesses, to private citizens who were affected by the coronavirus. And that took away from them, I think, pretty big leverage. One would say that, they did the right thing for the country, etc., etc. It's not, I agree with that. It's a very noble way to handle the situation. But I'll tell you this, if it was Netanyahu, he would never do it. And he would use it as a political leverage over them. About so I think that if they have to vote on a budget, Blue and White will just vote in favor. I don't see them voting against it at the moment. But again, a full budget, you only vote on a full budget after you form a government. And for now, we don't have a government, so it's only emergency aid and those kind of things. About the IDF, it's very interesting because the IDF is trying to operate or to distance itself from the rest of the country, to keep itself within some sort of a bubble, both in order to maintain security around the borders, but also in order to make sure all the preparations for the situation where the army will have to go in and to support the civilian population, so that they will reach that point with the least number of soldiers that are infected. There's I think, quite reasonable scenario that the IDF will have to go in. We see it in many countries. Germany just called in reservists to help the civilian authorities in the corona crisis. We see it in other countries, in Italy, in Spain. I think it's a matter of time until we'll see it in Israel.
Okay, great. So, I mean, not great at all, but thanks for that. So, I mean, the scenario that you have just drawn for us is that there will be a unity government, probably with a piece of blue and white's party. This is a government that is led by Netanyahu under the current corona crisis, which we don't know how it will, unfold and how long it will be with us. There's a Trump plan. We have a countdown, at least a Trump countdown, which we also don't know, how the elections in the U.S. will end. You reported about Kushner briefing senators about their plan, all making very clear the American administration's support to annexation, and also there's now a committee that is supposedly still operating, an American-Israeli committee that is reviewing steps towards annexation. So if you can give us in the last 10 to 12 minutes that we have, how should we look at what is going to happen? Is annexation around the corner? We would of course want to prepare for it with a very strong response, we being J Street, which are in strong opposition to annexation. And I mean, we haven't talked about the coronavirus and the Palestinian territories. We have a call next week, actually, that will go more into that. But if you can just use the time that we have left to give us your view of what's going to happen on the annexation front, and any development that is relevant for the Israeli-Palestinian relationship.
Yeah. So I'll first answer about the annexation as if there's no corona crisis. Okay. So if I'm saying things that look to you totally disconnected from reality, this is because I gave this disclaimer at the beginning. Okay. This first, the current, the Trump administration, I think is pretty ambivalent about the whole issue of annexation. Okay. On the one hand, it wants the Palestinians to somehow come back to the table. It wants to re-engage with them. It wants to talk to them on the plan. It wants to see if there's any way even to make the plan better for them. This is why you hear two messages from the White House these days for the Palestinians, okay? One message is, if you come back to the table, we can make this offer much, much better, okay? Not only in the concepts, but also move the lines of the maps, okay? Give you more territory, for example. On the other hand, they're saying, if you're not gonna come back to the table, we'll just, we're not gonna wait for you. And in a few months, when we finish our work with the Israelis, we'll just move on and let the Israelis annex whatever parts of the West Bank we agree with them that stay part of Israel. Okay, those are the two messages. Until now, I don't see either of the messages really being useful or influential when it comes to changing Palestinian behavior and convincing the Palestinians to somehow re-engage with the US. My personal opinion, by the way, in the last 2 years, since the Trump administration took the decision on moving the embassy, I think that one of the biggest mistakes the Palestinians did is to stop all contacts with the US. I think it was a very big mistake. It was counterproductive. It didn't get them anywhere. They did it after the embassy move. I know that they were very upset, rightly so, but still I think their reaction in retrospect was just counterproductive for their cause. So this is what the Americans are saying to the Palestinians, those two messages. To the Israelis, they're also giving two sorts of messages. On the one hand, they're saying annexation, not now. Let's wait because of Jordan, because of we want the Gulf states to still support the plan, because we want to wait for the Palestinians, because you have elections, you don't have a government. We want you to take a decision when there's a real government with a mandate, with legitimacy, so that it wouldn't be like thieves in the night. So this is one message. The other message is that they're saying, but you know what? Let's work on it. Let's demarcate the parts of the West Bank that might stay part of Israel, that Israel might annex. And they formed this committee. This committee had one meeting. I don't see in the foreseeable future this committee sitting down again in the next 2 or 3 months. In the current coalition negotiations between Gantz and Netanyahu, the issue of annexation is one of the main stumbling blocks, because Gantz, I said that I'm not giving him credit. One of the reasons I'm not giving him credit is because he backtracked on many of the things he said on annexation and on the Trump plan. Okay, he started by saying that he is asking the Trump administration not to release the plan before the Israeli elections. Then a week later, he said that he doesn't have a problem with the Trump administration releasing the plan before the elections. Then he said that he will support the annexation of the Jordan Valley if he has international consensus about it. Then he said that he didn't mean that he supports the annexation of the Jordan Valley, but only in an agreement, as part of an agreement, not unilaterally. So he moved back and forth on this issue. And right now, and to tell you the truth, Gantz's real position is that he's against annexation, both of the Jordan Valley and the settlements, as a unilateral move. Even as part of an agreement, I'm not sure Gantz really supports the annexation of the Jordan Valley, because he knows that there's no real agreement that will include annexation of the Jordan Valley. The only fear I have is that he's not well known for sticking up to what he believes in. So there is I can't see a scenario where he will cave and give up on this position against annexation in the coalition agreements. And here I end my disclaimer. All of the things I said in the last few minutes were without the corona crisis. But now we have the corona crisis. I have to tell you that I find it very hard to believe that anything will happen with the Trump plan until the elections, because the corona crisis will be with us, in my opinion, at least until the summer. Okay, at least, this is the most rosy picture I can draw, is that it will be with us until July or August. Okay, this is the minimum. Okay, if we're in July and August, elections are in November, nothing will happen until then. On both sides, the governments are dealing 24/7 with the corona crisis. I think it will continue. The economic ramifications will be with us for a very long time. I think that also when it comes to the people that are dealing dealt with the Trump plan, mainly Jared Kushner, he's now full-time dealing with the corona crisis together with the president. So I just don't see how they'll have, time and space to really deal with this issue of annexation and the peace plan. And so it's basically, I think, pushed to the second term. And here's an interesting thought. Let's say Trump loses the elections in November. I personally think that he's going to win and he's going to have a second term, but let's say he loses. This opens this period of between November and January for the Trump administration to give a green light for annexation if Netanyahu is still the prime minister. More or less like the Obama administration took steps like not
The UN
vetoing
Security Council.
the Security Council resolution on settlements. I see the Trump administration doing the same thing, but on the other side, giving a green light for annexation. But again, this is a very theoretical scenario. It's more than 6 months from now, and the Corona crisis just takes over everything. So in a way, for people who are concerned about annexation, the Corona crisis at least bought some time that I don't see either Israel or the US dealing with this issue. I'll just say one last thing, that the Corona crisis in a way gives an opportunity for both Israel and the US to reinvigorate their relations with the Palestinians. One of the things I hope the administration would do, it did it with Iran. It proposed the Iranians aid for countering the Corona crisis. It didn't do the same thing with the Palestinians. There's no doubt that the Iranian regime is much more hostile towards the US than the Palestinians. I really hope that the Trump administration will use this opportunity right now to reach out to the Palestinians and propose humanitarian aid for both Gaza and the West Bank for the Corona crisis. The Palestinians need it. I just hope that if such a thing happens, the Palestinians will not say no, because this would be really stupid. And I think
they still have the issue to solve with the fact that if they get aid from the UA, it puts it from the US, it puts them in jurisdiction of being sued against in US courts.
I think that humanitarian, I think that if it's humanitarian aid, there's some sort of an exemption, if I'm not mistaken, but I have to check it. And in any case, I think this is, those kind of crises, especially that you see in this crisis that Israel cannot work on its own without the Palestinians and vice versa. This opens an opportunity for further cooperation, working together to stop this disease.
Absolutely. I love this as a closing note. And if anyone who's listening or viewing us has good channels into the Trump administration, I fully recommend that you pass this message. Let me just close by really, really thanking Barak Ravid. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and learned from it, and I hope that all of you did as well. Follow Barak Ravid on Twitter. It's the best way really to learn about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Follow us on Twitter at jsri.org, and stay up to date, where we have a full program coming to you for all of us who are home. We'll have these calls on a weekly basis and even more. So look for what we're publishing and join us again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.